So all of our actions are maximally transparent. In fact, I don't think there's been, I don't know of a case where an organization has been more transparent than the Doge organization.
A lot of corruption.
If a judge does block one of your policies, part of your agenda, will you abide by that ruling? Will you comply
Well, I
with that
always
order?
abide by the courts, and then I'll have to appeal it. But then what he's done is he slowed down the momentum, and it gives crooked people more time to cover up the books.
At this point, the administration's aggressive executive action has been slowed or paused in the courts. Nothing that they've done that's been challenged in the courts yet has been really sanctioned, but that doesn't mean it won't ultimately be sanctioned. And so, to a certain extent, the Trump administration's policy in these first few weeks seems to be flood the zone with a volume of aggressive activity, see what can get through. The courts are clearly stopping most of it, but it will be very difficult for the judicial system to stop all of it, and some things will get through. And if you get to the point where we as a country, and this would be true if there were a Democrat in the White House, it's true if there's Donald Trump in the White House. If you get to a point where the executive branch starts simply ignoring the rulings of the judicial branch, then that is the removal of the card that makes the house of cards that is this democracy fall apart. You can
What kind of fraud are you expecting to see, or do you see right now in U.S. treasuries?
I think you mean that if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy, we live in a bureaucracy.
So the Trump administration is, without a doubt, pushing the edge of the envelope in the most aggressive ways possible on the front of telling executive branch agencies what they can and cannot do, and treading on the purview, at the very least, right up to the borderline of what has historically been allowed, and opponents would say crossing that line. But at a minimum, it is indisputable that the Trump administration is using the process of executive orders, as opposed to legislation that passes bicamerally in the House and then is signed into law, to flex the power of the executive branch. And that the judiciary doesn't have an army at its disposal the way the executive does, and the judiciary doesn't have the power of the purse at its disposal the way the legislative branch does. So the only thing that really gives the judiciary power is the notion of faith in the legitimacy of the checks and balances and the separation of powers. If there isn't a body that has the last say in terms of what the Constitution means, and that the executive has to comply with that, then the disadvantage that the judiciary has always had of not having that military or that purse is a disadvantage that becomes fatal to a lawful society, and lawlessness, or at least rule of law, becomes a buffet table where executive branch officials will follow it when it's convenient to do so and will ignore it when it's convenient to do so.
The Treasury has to pause payments if it thinks the payment is going to a fraudulent organization. If a company or organization is on a do not pay list, we should not pay it.
Some of the programs that are being frozen in place by the administration's executive orders are programs that were passed into law, where the spending was authorized by Congress, where a prior president signed that program into law, and where individuals on the receiving end, be they National Institute of Health grant recipients engaged in medical research, cancer research, biomedical research, HIV treatments around the world. Research, those programs are authorized. And in our system of government, in theory, the executive can't just ignore those authorizations. But if you take an aggressive approach to statutory law, and you take an aggressive approach to constitutional law, and you just say, in essence, we're going to get away with as much as we possibly can, and we'll see how much or how little that is, you can be pretty confident that you won't get caught on everything. And I think that seems to be the strategy.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate consensus among many in the legal community and the political science community, that we are, given the decisions that the president has put forward, on a pathway to a constitutional crisis that is not yet activated yet. And we are in the process now, we're only 3 weeks into the administration. We are in the process now of numerous court cases. And those court cases are very reasonable challenges to the actions that President Trump has taken, because many of the decisions he has made or actions he's taken look pretty apparently or pretty obviously to be either illegal under existing statute or even unconstitutional. The crisis happens if the courts get overwhelmed and really can't act, or if the courts act and make determinations in opposition to the president's position, and then the president, the vice president, the administration, the agencies simply refuse to adhere to the court's decisions. That would be a constitutional crisis. So this could play out over quite a period of time with unknown consequences. And the ramifications affect U.S. agriculture. They affect whether universities can perform biomedical research. They affect whether consumers have protections against certain kinds of actions taken by corporations. The reach is really quite extraordinary. And they could potentially affect whether or not privacy issues are fully protected in terms of Social Security payments or Medicare operations. And so there's just so much hanging in the balance to others. The question is, will he accept determinations by ultimately, for instance, the Supreme Court that run counter to his desires? And that's really where the risk is. But in the meantime, the other part of the constitutional crisis, if we want to put in those terms, is the fact that so many institutions, organizations, and individuals are feeling vulnerable, unsafe, and silenced.
About 1.5 million, I think we got to bring that one to an end. Okay?
Mr. President.